The Emergency Operations Center at the Department of Justice had been operating at maximum alert status for 48 hours, with Attorney General Pam Bondi coordinating the federal response to what intelligence agencies described as an unprecedented escalation in cartel violence threatening American territory. The secure facility, reinforced against both physical and electronic attack, buzzed with the controlled urgency of federal agents, military advisors, and state officials who had been summoned to address intelligence reports indicating that Mexican cartel organizations had deployed military-style assassination teams across the Texas border with orders to eliminate American law enforcement officials, government employees, and anyone who threatened their expanding criminal empire. The operations center itself had been transformed into a war room that rivaled military command facilities, with over 300 workstations equipped with classified communication systems connecting federal coordinators to field operatives positioned along the entire 2,000-mile border between the United States and Mexico. Satellite feeds provided real-time surveillance of border crossings, while advanced analytical software processed intelligence from human sources, electronic surveillance, and international partners to track cartel movements that suggested preparation for sustained military-style operations on American soil. The cartel hit squad deployment, designated Operation Sangre by Mexican intelligence sources, represented a fundamental escalation in the drug war that transformed what had been primarily a law enforcement challenge into a national security crisis requiring military-level response capabilities. Unlike previous cartel violence that had been largely contained within Mexico or limited to border regions, the hit squads had been specifically tasked with establishing permanent operational presence within Texas cities, creating what federal investigators described as terrorist safe havens that would allow cartels to conduct sustained military operations against American targets. The crisis had begun 72 hours earlier, when Border Patrol sensors detected unusual movement patterns along remote sections of the Rio Grande Valley, where sophisticated surveillance equipment had registered multiple groups of armed individuals crossing into American territory, using advanced military tactics that suggested professional training rather than typical smuggling operations. The crossings had occurred simultaneously at locations separated by hundreds of miles, indicating coordination that exceeded the capabilities of traditional smuggling organizations. The initial intelligence breakthrough had come from DEA Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, who had been conducting surveillance of known cartel safe houses in Houston when she observed the arrival of individuals whose appearance, equipment, and operational security procedures suggested military training far beyond that of typical cartel operatives. Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran who had worked undercover operations against every major Mexican cartel, immediately recognized that these individuals represented a new category of threat that exceeded traditional law enforcement capabilities. Rodriguez had spent her career tracking the evolution of Mexican cartels from relatively simple drug trafficking organizations to sophisticated criminal enterprises that operated with military discipline and advanced weapons. She had witnessed their transformation from opportunistic smugglers to paramilitary organizations that controlled territory, operated their own intelligence networks, and commanded financial resources that exceeded those of many legitimate governments. But the individuals she had observed in Houston represented something entirely new: professional military operators who had been deployed specifically to conduct sustained operations against American targets. FBI Counterterrorism Division Director Marcus Chen presented the intelligence assessment that had emerged from 72 hours of intensive investigation involving resources from across the federal intelligence community. Chen had spent his career investigating international threats to American security, from terrorist organizations to foreign intelligence services, but the cartel hit squad deployment represented a unique challenge that combined traditional organized crime with military-style operations designed to challenge American governmental authority within the continental United States. What we're confronting is not traditional cartel activity, Chen began, addressing the crisis management team that included senior officials from every major federal agency. Intelligence indicates that multiple Mexican cartel organizations have deployed professionally trained assassination teams with orders to eliminate American law enforcement officials, prosecutors, judges, and government employees who threaten their operations. These are not street-level criminals. These are professional killers with military training, advanced weapons, and specific target lists that include federal officials, state prosecutors, and local law enforcement leaders. The intelligence picture revealed the scope and sophistication of the cartel operation. At least 4 major Mexican criminal organizations had contributed personnel and resources to establish what intelligence analysts described as a cartel coalition designed to achieve through coordinated violence what individual organizations had been unable to accomplish through traditional criminal methods. The Sinaloa cartel had provided operational leadership and financial resources. The Jalisco New Generation cartel had contributed specialized personnel with advanced military training. The Gulf cartel had provided intelligence networks and logistical support. Los Zetas had supplied weapons and tactical expertise developed through their origins as elite military deserters. The hit squad personnel were not typical cartel operatives, but professional soldiers who had been recruited from Mexican military and law enforcement organizations, along with foreign mercenaries who had been provided with advanced training in assassination techniques, urban warfare, and counter-surveillance methods. Intelligence reports suggested that the teams included former members of Mexican Special Forces units, corrupt police officers with tactical training, and even foreign military advisors who had been recruited to provide expertise in conducting sustained military operations in urban environments. The operational structure was designed to maximize effectiveness while maintaining security that would prevent American authorities from mapping the complete network. Individual hit squads operated as independent cells with limited knowledge of other teams, while coordination was maintained through sophisticated communication systems that used advanced encryption and operational security procedures. Each team had been provided with specific target lists, operational areas, and contingency plans that would allow them to continue operations even if other teams were compromised or eliminated. The target selection demonstrated the strategic nature of the cartel operation. Rather than focusing on traditional criminal competitors or rival organizations, the hit squads had been tasked with eliminating American officials whose activities threatened cartel operations across multiple states. The target lists included federal prosecutors who had achieved significant convictions against cartel leaders, DEA agents who had successfully disrupted major trafficking operations, Border Patrol officials who had implemented effective interdiction programs, and even judges who had imposed lengthy sentences on cartel operatives. DEA Intelligence Division Director Sarah Martinez presented the analysis of cartel capabilities that had allowed them to deploy professional military units against American targets. Martinez had spent her career tracking the militarization of Mexican cartels, from their initial adoption of military weapons to their recruitment of former soldiers to their current evolution into paramilitary organizations that operated with discipline and tactical sophistication that rivaled legitimate military forces. The cartels have essentially created their own private armies, Martinez reported, displaying organizational charts that showed the command structures of major cartel military units. They've recruited former Mexican military officers, provided advanced training to their operatives, and equipped them with weapons that in some cases exceed those available to American law enforcement agencies. The hit squads represent the deployment of these military capabilities specifically against American targets, marking a fundamental escalation in the drug war that transforms this from a law enforcement challenge into a national security crisis. The cartel military capabilities had evolved through systematic recruitment of professional soldiers who had been attracted by financial compensation that exceeded their legitimate military salaries by orders of magnitude. Mexican military deserters had been recruited not just as individual operatives, but as training cadres who had established formal military education programs for cartel personnel. These programs had produced operatives with skills in advanced weapons, explosives, communications, and tactical operations that exceeded those of typical criminal organizations. The weapons available to cartel military units included not just traditional small arms, but military-grade equipment that had been obtained through corruption of Mexican military officials, theft from government armories, and international arms trafficking networks that had provided access to weapons typically available only to legitimate military forces. Intelligence reports indicated that cartel hit squads had access to automatic weapons, armor-piercing ammunition, military-grade explosives, and even anti-aircraft weapons that could be used against American law enforcement helicopters and aircraft. The tactical capabilities demonstrated by cartel military units in Mexico had included sophisticated urban warfare operations, coordinated multi-unit attacks, and even the ability to challenge Mexican military forces in direct combat. These capabilities had been developed through actual combat experience gained during cartel wars that had claimed over 300,000 lives in Mexico over the past 2 decades, providing cartel operatives with real-world military experience that exceeded that of many legitimate military personnel. The intelligence networks operated by cartels had successfully penetrated Mexican government agencies, military organizations, and law enforcement institutions, providing them with advance warning of government operations while gathering intelligence about American law enforcement activities. These networks had been essential to the successful deployment of hit squads across the American border, providing them with intelligence about border patrol activities, law enforcement response procedures, and even personal information about targeted American officials. Texas Department of Public Safety Director Jennifer Walsh presented the state-level intelligence that had revealed the scope of cartel penetration into Texas communities and the specific threats facing state and local officials. Walsh had spent her career in Texas law enforcement, rising through the ranks during the period when cartel violence had increasingly spilled across the border, transforming border communities from peaceful agricultural areas into war zones where local authorities faced threats that exceeded their capabilities and resources. Cartel hit squads have established operational presence in at least 12 Texas cities, Walsh reported, displaying maps that showed confirmed cartel activities across the state. These are not temporary incursions. Intelligence indicates they've established safe houses, weapons caches, and support networks that suggest preparation for sustained operations. Local law enforcement agencies have reported unusual surveillance activities, targeting police stations, courthouses, and the homes of prosecutors and judges. We're essentially facing an invasion by foreign military forces operating within our state. The cartel presence in Texas had been established through systematic exploitation of existing criminal networks, corruption of local officials, and intimidation of civilian populations that had created environments where cartel operatives could establish operational bases with minimal risk of detection or interference. The cartels had successfully identified communities where limited law enforcement resources, economic desperation, and proximity to border crossing points created opportunities for establishing permanent operational presence. The safe house networks included facilities that had been specifically prepared for military operations, with defensive positions, weapons storage, and communication equipment that would allow cartel operatives to conduct sustained operations while maintaining security against law enforcement response. Intelligence indicated that some facilities had been fortified with military-grade defensive systems and had been stocked with supplies that would allow cartel teams to operate independently for extended periods. The weapons caches discovered by Texas law enforcement had included military-grade firearms, explosives, and specialized equipment that exceeded the capabilities typically available to local criminal organizations. The weapons had been pre-positioned to support cartel operations while providing contingency resources that could be used if primary supply lines were disrupted by law enforcement activities. The support networks included both willing collaborators who had been recruited through financial inducements and unwilling participants who had been coerced through threats against themselves and their families. The support networks provided cartel operatives with local knowledge, logistical support, and intelligence about law enforcement activities that were essential to successful operations in unfamiliar territory. Border Patrol Sector Chief Michael Torres presented the border security analysis that revealed how cartel hit squads had successfully crossed into American territory despite enhanced security measures that had been implemented over the past decade. Torres had spent his career defending the border against increasingly sophisticated smuggling operations, but the cartel military deployment represented a new category of threat that challenged traditional border security approaches. The cartels have successfully deployed military units across our border using tactics that were specifically designed to defeat our detection and interdiction capabilities, Torres reported, displaying technical analysis of cartel crossing methods. They've studied our surveillance systems, analyzed our response procedures, and developed infiltration techniques that exploit weaknesses in our border security infrastructure. These are not typical border crossers. These are professional military operations conducted by individuals with advanced training in infiltration and counter-surveillance techniques. The border crossing operations had been conducted using sophisticated military tactics that included diversionary operations designed to draw Border Patrol resources away from actual infiltration points, advanced reconnaissance that had identified gaps in surveillance coverage, and timing that had exploited shift changes and other vulnerabilities in border security procedures. The crossings had been conducted simultaneously at multiple locations, indicating coordination that required sophisticated communication systems and operational planning. The infiltration techniques had included the use of advanced equipment that allowed cartel operatives to avoid detection by surveillance systems while maintaining operational capability during extended movements through difficult terrain. The operatives had demonstrated knowledge of Border Patrol operational procedures that suggested intelligence gathering, that had provided them with detailed information about American border security capabilities and limitations. The counter-surveillance capabilities demonstrated by cartel operatives had included techniques for avoiding detection by electronic surveillance systems while maintaining operational security during extended operations in American territory. These capabilities suggested training that exceeded that typically available to criminal organizations and indicated professional military or intelligence training that had been specifically adapted for operations against American security forces. NSA Signals Intelligence Division Director Patricia Rodriguez presented the communications intelligence that had provided federal authorities with insights into cartel operational planning and coordination methods. Rodriguez had spent her career analyzing communications by hostile organizations, but the cartel communications represented security practices that rivaled those of nation-state intelligence services while supporting operations that directly threatened American national security. Cartel organizations have developed communications security procedures that have successfully prevented our traditional signals intelligence methods from penetrating their operational networks, Rodriguez reported, displaying technical analysis of cartel communications systems. They use advanced encryption, sophisticated operational security procedures, and have even established independent communication networks that operate without relying on commercial telecommunications infrastructure. This communication security has been essential to their ability to coordinate hit squad operations while avoiding detection by American intelligence agencies. The communication security measures used by cartels had been developed through systematic analysis of American intelligence capabilities combined with professional training that had been provided by individuals with experience in military and intelligence communications security. The measures included not just technical encryption, but operational procedures that limited the information transmitted through any single communication channel while maintaining coordination between operational elements. The independent communication networks operated by cartels included systems that could function even during emergency situations when commercial telecommunications might be disrupted or monitored more intensively by law enforcement agencies. These networks provided cartels with communications capabilities that would allow them to coordinate operations even during sustained law enforcement responses that might compromise traditional communication methods. The operational security procedures used by cartel communications had successfully prevented American intelligence agencies from mapping the complete scope of cartel operations while gathering intelligence about American law enforcement activities. These procedures included techniques for detecting surveillance, avoiding pattern recognition systems, and maintaining operational security during extended operations in hostile territory. Homeland Security Intelligence Division Director Robert Martinez presented the threat assessment that had led to the decision to declare a federal emergency in response to the cartel hit squad deployment. Martinez had spent his career analyzing threats to American homeland security, but the cartel operation represented a unique challenge that combined aspects of terrorism, organized crime, and military invasion that exceeded traditional threat categories. The cartel hit squad deployment represents a direct challenge to American governmental authority within the continental United States, Martinez reported, displaying threat analysis that had been prepared by intelligence analysts from multiple agencies. These are foreign military units that have been deployed specifically to conduct sustained operations against American targets, including government officials, law enforcement personnel, and civilian infrastructure. The threat level exceeds that of traditional organized crime and approaches that of international terrorism or foreign military invasion. The threat assessment had considered multiple factors that distinguished the cartel operation from traditional criminal activity. The military training and equipment of cartel operatives created capabilities that exceeded those of typical criminal organizations. The specific targeting of American government officials represented a direct challenge to governmental authority rather than traditional criminal competition. The coordinated nature of the operation suggested strategic planning that was designed to achieve political objectives rather than simply criminal profit. The potential for escalation was particularly concerning because cartel operations in Mexico had demonstrated their willingness to engage in sustained military operations against government forces. The deployment of hit squads into American territory created the possibility that similar military operations could be conducted against American targets, potentially creating situations where local law enforcement would be unable to respond effectively without military support. The intelligence community assessment had concluded that the cartel operation represented a clear and present danger to American national security that required response capabilities that exceeded those of traditional law enforcement agencies. The recommendation for federal emergency declaration had been based on the assessment that state and local authorities lacked the resources and capabilities necessary to address a threat of this magnitude and complexity. Bondi studied the intelligence reports and threat assessments that covered the walls of the operations center, each document representing the analysis of threats that challenged fundamental assumptions about American homeland security. The maps, showing confirmed cartel operations across Texas, revealed how successfully foreign criminal organizations had penetrated American territory while establishing operational capabilities that threatened American officials and institutions. The situation we're confronting represents a fundamental challenge to American sovereignty and the rule of law, Bondi announced to the assembled crisis management team. Foreign military units have been deployed on American territory with orders to murder American law enforcement officials, prosecutors, judges, and government employees. This is not traditional organized crime. This is an act of war conducted by foreign criminal organizations that have declared their intention to challenge American governmental authority through coordinated violence. The federal emergency declaration would authorize resources and authorities that exceeded those available through traditional law enforcement channels. The declaration would allow deployment of military assets for homeland defense, authorization of enhanced surveillance and intelligence gathering capabilities, and coordination between federal, state, and local authorities that would provide a unified response to the cartel threat. The response strategy, designated Operation Lone Star Shield, would involve the largest deployment of federal resources for homeland defense since the September 11th attacks. The operation would require coordination between military forces, federal law enforcement agencies, state authorities, and local law enforcement to identify and eliminate cartel hit squads while preventing the establishment of permanent cartel operational presence within American territory. Phase 1 would involve immediate deployment of federal tactical teams to provide protection for identified targets, while conducting operations to locate and arrest cartel operatives who had already established presence within Texas communities. The protection operations would include not just law enforcement officials, but prosecutors, judges, and government employees whose activities had made them targets for cartel violence. Phase 2 would involve enhanced border security operations designed to prevent additional cartel infiltration, while identifying and intercepting cartel operatives who might attempt to flee American territory. The border security enhancement would include deployment of military assets for surveillance and interdiction, while maintaining coordination with Mexican authorities who were committed to preventing cartel use of Mexican territory for operations against American targets. Phase 3 would involve comprehensive investigation and prosecution of American individuals and organizations who had provided support for cartel operations, including corruption of government officials, provision of logistical support, and facilitation of cartel establishment within American communities. The investigations would use all available federal authorities, while maintaining due process protections for American citizens who might have been coerced into providing support. Phase 4 would involve international coordination with Mexican authorities and other partners to address the underlying cartel capabilities that had made the hit squad deployment possible. This would require diplomatic initiatives, intelligence cooperation, and potentially military coordination to address cartel safe havens and operational bases that were located outside American territory but supported operations against American targets. The cartels believe they can intimidate American law enforcement through coordinated violence and establish operational presence within American territory that will allow them to conduct sustained military operations against American targets, Bondi told the assembled crisis management team. They have calculated that their military capabilities, their financial resources, and their willingness to engage in unlimited violence will overcome American law enforcement capabilities and force us to accommodate their criminal activities. She paused, studying the faces of the federal officials who would be coordinating the most comprehensive homeland defense operation since World War II. They are about to discover that no foreign organization, regardless of its military capabilities or criminal resources, can successfully challenge American sovereignty on American soil. Operation Lone Star Shield will demonstrate that the United States government has the capability, the determination, and the legal authority to defend American territory against any threat, whether it comes from terrorist organizations, foreign governments, or criminal enterprises that have declared war on American institutions. The crisis management briefing concluded with operational assignments that would mobilize thousands of federal agents, military personnel, and state law enforcement officers in a coordinated response to eliminate the cartel threat while preventing escalation that could lead to sustained military operations within American territory. The cartel hit squads that had crossed American borders with orders to murder American officials would face the full force of American military and law enforcement capabilities. As the crisis management team prepared for Operation Lone Star Shield, Bondi remained in the operations center, studying the intelligence displays that showed cartel operations across Texas. Somewhere within the state, foreign military units were preparing to conduct assassination operations against American officials who had devoted their careers to protecting American communities from criminal violence. But they had underestimated the resolve of American institutions and the capabilities of American military and law enforcement agencies when confronted with direct threats to American sovereignty. They were about to learn that Attorney General Pam Bondi's Justice Department would defend American territory and American officials with every resource available to the federal government. Within 24 hours, Operation Lone Star Shield would begin, and the cartel hit squads that had invaded American territory would face the overwhelming force of American military and law enforcement agencies united in defense of American sovereignty.